Welcome back to LovexRomancexRevenge, the channel where passion collides with power, secrets shatter hearts, and love is never simple. If you enjoy emotionally charged romance stories filled with betrayal, redemption, and unforgettable twists, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Maya Collins had always believed desperation was loud. Tears, screaming, chaos. She learned that day it was silent. The office atop Blackwood Global's headquarters was quiet in a way that pressed against her ears. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the city below, glittering and alive, while she sat stiffly on a leather chair that probably cost more than everything she owned combined. Her palms were damp despite the cold precision of the air conditioning. Across from her stood Alexander Blackwood. He wasn't what she expected. No smug grin. No careless arrogance. Instead, he carried himself with the calm certainty of a man who never heard the word no. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his cufflinks understated, his gaze sharp enough to feel like a scalpel. He reviewed a document on his tablet as though she weren't there at all. Maya swallowed hard. She reminded herself why she had come. Her mother's hospital bills were overdue. Her brother's foster placement was under review. One more missed payment, one more failed inspection, and she would lose the only family she had left. When Alexander finally looked up, the room seemed to shrink. "You understand," he said evenly, "that what I'm offering is not charity." Maya nodded. "I do." He studied her for a long moment, as if measuring her worth in figures only he could see. "This arrangement will be mutually beneficial. You gain financial security. I gain stability." "Stability," she echoed quietly. "A wife," he clarified. "On paper." The words landed like a blow. Marriage was supposed to be sacred, emotional, chosen, not something drafted by lawyers and signed under fluorescent lights. Yet here she was. Alexander slid the contract across the desk. The pages were thick, the language precise. 2 years of marriage, strict confidentiality, public appearances, no claims on his company, and one clause underlined twice. No emotional expectations. Maya's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. "And after 2 years?" she asked. "We divorce," he replied without hesitation. Quietly, cleanly. She looked up at him then. "Why me?" For the first time, something flickered across his face. So fast she almost missed it. "You were recommended," he said. "And you fit the criteria." Criteria. Not kind. Not strong. Not deserving. Just suitable. Maya leaned back, her chest tight. This wasn't a romance. This was a transaction. She told herself she could survive 2 years of pretending. People endured worse for far less. "What about my brother?" she asked. "You promised protection." Alexander nodded once. "His legal situation will be resolved by the end of the week. Full custody transferred to you. His education funded through university." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. That was the moment she realized the truth. This man could save her, or destroy her, with a signature. She reached for the pen. "Rules?" she asked quietly. "Yes." His voice softened just slightly. "We respect each other publicly. Privately, we stay out of each other's lives." Maya signed. The sound of the pen scratching against paper echoed louder than it should have. With each stroke, her old life disappeared. Her dreams of marrying for love, her belief in choice, her sense of control. When she finished, Alexander added his signature without hesitation. "It's done," he said. He stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the Blackwood family, Mrs. Blackwood." She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the firmness of his grip. Something in her chest twisted painfully. As she walked out of the office moments later, engagement ring glittering on her finger, Maya told herself the same lie over and over. This is just a contract. Nothing more. She didn't see Alexander standing at the window long after she left, watching her reflection disappear into the city below. Nor did she know that long before she walked into his office, her name had already been written into his life, not as a wife, but as a calculated risk that would one day cost him everything. The Blackwood mansion did not feel like a home, felt like a statement. Maya realized this the moment the iron gates closed behind the car, sealing her inside a world designed to impress, intimidate, and control. The driveway curved endlessly toward a towering estate of stone and glass, every window gleaming, every surface immaculate. Nothing here looked lived in. Nothing felt warm. "This is where you'll be staying," the house manager said politely as she led Maya through the grand doors. Her tone was respectful, but distant, professional in the way people became when emotions were unwelcome. Maya nodded, clutching her handbag as though it anchored her to reality. Alexander was already gone. A business call, she was told. It was her first lesson as Mrs. Blackwood. His world did not pause for her arrival. Her bedroom was larger than her old apartment. A king-sized bed dressed in pristine white, a sitting area she would never use, a balcony overlooking manicured gardens. There were no personal touches. No photos, no warmth. Just space. Too much of it. That night, Maya dined alone. A long table. Silver cutlery. Food prepared by a private chef she had not met. The chair at the head of the table remained empty, a silent reminder that this marriage existed only in name. She slept poorly, the silence pressing down on her harder than noise ever could. The following days fell into a pattern. Stylists arrived to fit her wardrobe. Lawyers reviewed public conduct. Assistants handed her schedules she hadn't asked for. Every hour of her life was managed now, curated to fit the image of Alexander Blackwood's wife. When Alexander finally returned, it was past midnight. Maya was in the library, barefoot, curled into one of the leather chairs with a book she barely absorbed. She looked up when the door opened. He paused, surprised to see her there. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you," she replied before she could stop herself. For a brief moment, something like amusement touched his eyes. They stood there, unsure how to exist in the same space. "I'll have staff prepare breakfast tomorrow," he said eventually. "We have a press appearance at 10. "Of course," she answered, standing. "I'll be ready." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Awkwardness, curiosity, restraint. Then he turned away. Publicly, they were flawless. Photographers captured them entering events hand in hand. Headlines praised their elegance, their chemistry, their sudden romance. Maya learned to smile on cue, to tilt her head just so, to laugh softly at Alexander's murmured comments. She played the role perfectly. Privately, they remained strangers. They spoke in polite exchanges over coffee. They passed each other in hallways like guests in the same hotel. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives. Yet cracks formed where neither expected them. Alexander noticed things. How Maya thanked every staff member by name. How she flinched at raised voices. How she spent hours on the phone with her brother. Her tone gentle, protective. Maya noticed too. How Alexander loosened his tie the moment he stepped inside. How exhaustion crept into his posture when no one was watching. How he lingered near doorways, as if unsure whether he belonged anywhere. One evening, she found him in the kitchen, alone, pouring himself coffee instead of calling for staff. "You do this often?" she asked. He shrugged. "Sometimes I forget how." "How what?" "How to let people take care of things." The honesty surprised them both. That night, they sat at the counter, speaking softly, carefully avoiding anything personal, yet somehow sharing more than the contract allowed. When Maya returned to her room later, her heart felt strangely unsettled. This was supposed to be easy. She was supposed to be pretending. But somewhere between shared silences and stolen glances, Maya realized something terrifying. Being Alexander Blackwood's wife might be a lie. But the loneliness they shared, that part was painfully real. The charity gala was supposed to be simple. Mail. Hold hands. Pose for cameras. Leave early. Maya repeated the instructions in her head as the car rolled to a stop outside the Grand Aurelius Hotel, its entrance glowing beneath chandeliers and camera flashes. She adjusted the emerald gown the stylists had chosen for her, a color so deep it felt dangerous, as if it were daring her to feel something she wasn't supposed to. Alexander stepped out first, offering his hand. When she took it, the warmth of his palm sent an unexpected shiver up her arm. "Remember," he murmured without looking at her. "Stay close." "I know," she replied, though her voice wavered. Inside, the room buzzed with power and wealth. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter rang hollow. Maya felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the awareness that she didn't truly belong here. Alexander sensed it. His hand tightened slightly at her waist, grounding her. The gesture was subtle, protective. Not for the cameras. They moved through the crowd, accepting greetings, nodding politely. Then it happened. A tall man with a smug smile, one of Alexander's rivals, looked Maya up and down with thinly veiled judgment. "So this is the new Mrs. Blackwood," he said lightly. "You married quickly. Quite the leap from your previous circumstances." The insult was wrapped in silk, but it cut deep. Maya froze. Before she could respond, Alexander stepped forward. "My wife's past is not a topic for public discussion," he said calmly. "And her present speaks for itself." The man laughed awkwardly, muttering an apology before retreating. Maya stared at Alexander, stunned. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I did," he replied simply. For the rest of the evening, Alexander stayed close. Not as an act, but as if something in him had shifted. They moved in sync, hands finding each other without thinking. Laughter came easier. The pretense felt thinner. Too thin. Later, they stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the noise of the gala fading behind them. The night air was cool, carrying the distant hum of traffic. "You handled that well," Maya said. He leaned against the railing. "I don't tolerate disrespect." "That wasn't business," she said softly. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't." Silence settled between them, heavy, charged. Maya realized how close they were standing. Too close. She could smell his cologne, see the tension in his jaw. "This isn't part of the contract," she said, though she didn't move away. Alexander turned to face her fully. "Neither is how I feel right now." Her breath caught. For a moment, fear flashed across his face, not of her but of himself, of crossing a line he had drawn carefully, deliberately. "You don't want this," she whispered. "It complicates everything." His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "I already crossed that line the moment I cared." The words shattered her defenses. Maya should have stepped back. Instead, she closed the distance. The kiss began hesitant, uncertain. Two people pretending not to want what they'd been denying for weeks. But hesitation gave way to hunger, to longing held too long in check. When they finally pulled apart, the world felt altered. "This changes things," Maya said, her voice trembling. "Yes," he replied. "It does." That night, the walls between them fell. They spoke openly for the first time, about loneliness, about expectations, about the strange weight of living a life designed by others. Alexander admitted he had never planned to feel anything for her. Maya admitted she was terrified of how much she already did. When dawn crept through the windows, Maya lay awake in his arms, listening to his steady breathing. She allowed herself to believe, just for that moment, that something real had been born from something false. Alexander stared at the ceiling, guilt coiled tightly in his chest. Because even as he held her, even as he felt something dangerously close to love, he knew a truth she did not. This was never meant to happen. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would destroy everything they had just begun to build. Maya didn't go looking for the truth. That was the cruelest part of it. The morning began like any other. Quiet, structured, controlled. Alexander had already left for an early board meeting. His side of the bed still warm when she woke. She told herself not to read into that small intimacy, not to assign meaning to the way he'd brushed a kiss against her temple before leaving. This was still a contract. She dressed slowly, trying to calm the restless ache in her chest, and decided to explore the study she'd been meaning to organize. It was a beautiful room. Dark wood shelves, leather chairs, a desk positioned perfectly to command the space. Everything in it screamed power, order. As she dusted the desk, her hand brushed against a drawer that didn't budge. That alone wouldn't have bothered her, except she felt it. An inexplicable pull, a whisper of instinct telling her to stop pretending everything was fine. She hesitated, then searched for the key. It wasn't difficult to find. Alexander was meticulous, but he trusted routine. The key rested in a small tray beside his cufflinks, hidden in plain sight. Her heart pounded as she returned to the study. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside were folders, neatly labeled, color-coded, precise. Corporate reports, legal documents. Then she saw one with her name. Maya Collins. Background and contingency. Her breath caught. Hands trembling, she opened it. Every detail of her life stared back at her. Her childhood address. Her mother's illness. Her brother's case file. Bank statements. Employment history. She flipped faster now, panic rising. Then she saw her father's name. Her chest constricted painfully. There were old articles, scanned newspaper clippings, about a whistleblower who had tried to expose financial manipulation inside Blackwood Global years ago. The name was familiar because it was hers. Her father. Her vision blurred as she read further. Risk assessment. Potential liability neutralized through legal union. Outcome. Subject placed under corporate protection and NDA via marriage contract. The words burned. This wasn't protection. This was containment. Maya staggered back, sinking into the chair as the truth crashed over her in waves. Alexander hadn't chosen her because she was suitable. He'd chosen her because she was dangerous. Because her father had almost destroyed his empire. And marrying her had ensured her silence. Memories rewrote themselves in her mind. The timing of his offer, the speed with which her brother's custody had been resolved, the insistence on confidentiality. She hadn't been rescued. She'd been managed. Alexander found her in the study that evening. She was standing by the desk, the open folder between them like a weapon. "What is this?" she asked, her voice frighteningly calm. He stopped short. The silence stretched. "Maya! Don't," she snapped. "Tell me the truth. All of it." He exhaled slowly, as though preparing for impact. "It started as risk mitigation," he said quietly. "Your father's actions could have reopened investigations. You were a variable." Her laugh was hollow. "So you married me to erase me." "No," he said quickly. "I married you to protect you." "By lying," she demanded. "By turning my life into a corporate strategy." He stepped closer, pain etched into his face. "I never planned to fall in love with you." The words that once would have shattered her now felt meaningless. "Everything you gave me," she said, tears streaming down her face, "came with strings attached." "Yes," he admitted. "At first." She shook her head, backing away. "You took my choices, my trust, my love. I was trying to fix my father's sins," he said. "And I became them instead." The confession didn't soften the betrayal. Maya closed the folder carefully, as if touching it too hard might break what little strength she had left. "You don't get to decide what's best for me," she said quietly. "Not ever." She walked past him, her footsteps steady despite the storm inside her. Behind her, Alexander stood frozen, realizing the truth far too late. The greatest risk he had ever taken wasn't marrying Maya Collins. It was believing he could control love the same way he controlled everything else. Maya didn't sleep that night. She lay curled on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling as if it might crack open and swallow her whole. Every moment she had shared with Alexander replayed in her mind. Every smile, every protective gesture, every whispered confession, now stripped bare by the truth. It had all been built on a lie. When dawn finally crept through the curtains, her decision was already made. She moved quietly through the mansion, packing only what mattered. Documents. Her brother's drawings, carefully folded and placed between sweaters. The ring came last. She slid it off her finger and set it on the dresser, its diamond catching the light like a mocking eye. Alexander found her in the foyer just as the driver loaded her suitcase into the car. "Maya," he said, his voice hoarse. "Please. Let me explain." She turned to face him. He had never looked so small. "I understand perfectly," she said. "That's the problem." He stepped closer, hands open, as if approaching something fragile. "Yes, I made mistakes. But what we have, that was real." She shook her head slowly. "Real love doesn't begin with manipulation." "It didn't end that way," he insisted. "You changed everything." Her laugh broke, sharp and painful. "I didn't change your motives. I just uncovered them." Silence pressed between them. "I love you," he said finally. The words arrived too late. "Love doesn't feel like a trap," she replied. "And it doesn't come with contingency plans." She reached into her bag and pulled out copies of the documents she'd found, placing them carefully on the marble table. "You turned my father's fight for truth into a bargaining chip," she said. "You erased his sacrifice to protect your empire." Alexander's face crumpled. "I was trying to prevent another war," he whispered. "And you started one anyway," Maya said. The driver cleared his throat softly, reminding them time was passing. Maya picked up her bag. "I won't be silenced," she said. "Not by marriage. Not by money." Alexander grabbed her wrist, not roughly but desperately. "Don't do this," he said. "I'll give up everything if I have to." She met his gaze, tears shining but unyielding. "You already did. You just don't see it yet." She pulled free. The car door closed with a finality that echoed through the driveway. As the vehicle pulled away, Alexander stood frozen, watching the woman he had grown to love disappear beyond the gates. Days later, the mansion felt emptier than it ever had before. Alexander walked through rooms that still carried traces of her. Her book on the nightstand, her scarf draped over a chair. Every reminder cut deeper than any financial loss ever could. Meanwhile, Maya stayed in a modest apartment across town. Her life suddenly quiet but brutally honest. She returned to work, reconnected with old friends, and spent long evenings holding her brother close, grounding herself in something real. Yet anger burned beneath her grief. Alexander's power had nearly erased her voice. She wouldn't let it happen again. One evening, as she sorted through her father's old files, something inside her hardened into resolve. The evidence was still there. Proof of corruption hidden for years. She added her own discoveries to the pile. Contracts, memos, timelines. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. This was about justice. Alexander had thought love would make the lie harmless. Instead, love had turned the lie into ash. And from those ashes, Maya began to build something new. Not as a wife, not as a pawn, but as a woman reclaiming her truth. As the city lights flickered outside her window, Maya made a silent vow. If Alexander Blackwood had written her into his strategy, she would write the ending. And this time it wouldn't be in his favor. The first headline appeared on a Tuesday morning. Alexander Blackwood stared at the screen in disbelief as his name, once synonymous with power and stability, burned across every major financial outlet. Blackwood Global under investigation. Whistleblower evidence resurfaces. His phone vibrated endlessly. Board members, legal counsel, investors. He ignored them all, his chest tight as the article scrolled on. Anonymous sources, internal documents, proof dating back years. Meh. He knew it instantly. And he didn't blame her. By noon, the stock had dropped 12%. By evening, it was chaos. Emergency meetings were called. Lawyers argued in hushed, frantic voices. Executives avoided eye contact. The empire Alexander had spent his life maintaining began to crack, fault lines spreading faster than anyone could contain. "This isn't damage control anymore," one board member snapped. "This is survival." Alexander said nothing. For the first time, strategy failed him. Power offered no shield. He felt exposed, naked before a world that no longer feared him. Across the city, Maya sat in a quiet office, hands folded tightly in her lap as investigators reviewed the file she had submitted. Her father's documents, her own findings, the marriage contract that proved deliberate concealment. She spoke clearly, calmly, even as her heart pounded. "This wasn't revenge," she said. "This was the truth." The agents exchanged glances. "We'll take it from here," one of them said. When she stepped outside, the air felt lighter. She didn't feel victorious. She felt free. The second wave hit harder. A former executive came forward. Then another. The silence Alexander had paid for over the years shattered completely. Blackwood Global's board voted to suspend him pending investigation. The vote was unanimous. Alexander stood as security escorted him from the building he had once ruled, cameras flashing, voices shouting questions he didn't answer. In that moment, he finally understood the weight of his father's sins, and his own. He had believed he could control consequences. He was wrong. Days turned into weeks. Alexander's accounts were frozen. His reputation disintegrated. Invitations vanished. Friends disappeared. The mansion emptied. Staff resigned quietly, respectfully, as though leaving a sinking ship. Alexander wandered the halls alone, haunted by echoes of a life that had once been full of noise and purpose. At night, sleep eluded him. He replayed his choices again and again, every calculated decision, every justification. He told himself he had acted to protect the company, to prevent chaos. But beneath all of it lay the truth he could no longer escape. He had betrayed Maya because he believed power entitled him to decide her fate. And losing her hurt more than losing everything else combined. Maya watched the fallout from a distance. She avoided interviews, declined book offers, ignored strangers who called her brave. She focused instead on rebuilding, on enrolling her brother in a new school, on returning to a life not defined by someone else's shadow. Still, some nights were hard. She missed the man Alexander could have been. But she refused to miss the lie. The day Alexander resigned as CEO, the announcement was brief. No denial, no excuses, just a single line that shocked the world. "I accept full responsibility." He closed his office door for the last time and stepped into the sunlight as an ordinary man. No title, no empire, only regret. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Blackwood faced a future that could not be negotiated, controlled, or bought. Somewhere beyond the noise of scandal and collapse, one truth remained painfully clear. The greatest loss of his life wasn't Blackwood Global. It was the woman who had shown him what integrity looked like, and walked away when he failed to live up to it. Victory didn't feel the way Maya had imagined. There were no fireworks, no rush of triumph, no sudden sense of peace. Instead, there was a quiet heaviness that settled into her chest, lingering long after the headlines faded and the world moved on to its next scandal. Justice had been served, yes, but it hadn't erased the memories of what she and Alexander had shared before the truth destroyed it. Maya learned that revenge could correct the past without healing it. She kept her life deliberately small. Morning walks with her brother, long hours at work, evenings spent cooking simple meals in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and warmth instead of wealth and polish. She avoided the parts of the city that reminded her of him, though his presence followed her anyway, in quiet moments, in half-forgotten dreams. Then, one rainy evening, her past knocked on her door. She hesitated before opening it. Alexander stood there, soaked to the skin, his hair darker from the rain, his coat worn and unremarkable. No driver waited behind him. No security detail hovered nearby. Just a man stripped of everything. "I won't stay long," he said quietly. "I just needed to see you." Maya stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, as though the walls remembered his absence too sharply. They stood across from each other, uncertain. "I read your resignation," she said. He nodded. It was overdue. She waited for excuses. None came. I lost the company, he continued. But I lost myself long before that. I thought power meant responsibility. Instead, I used it as permission. Her arms folded tightly around herself. Why are you here, Alexander? He met her gaze steadily. Not to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. The honesty disarmed her. I came to tell you I'm sorry, he said. Not as your husband. Not as a CEO. Just as a man who failed you. Tears burned her eyes, and she hated that they did. You don't get to come here and reopen wounds, she said softly. I know, he replied. This isn't about easing my guilt. It's about acknowledging what I took from you. Silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid words. I loved you, she admitted. And that made the betrayal unbearable. His breath caught. I still do, he said, voice breaking. But I won't insult you by asking for another chance. That was the cruelest kindness of all. After he left, Maya sat alone in the dim light, the sound of rain filling the space he'd occupied moments before. She didn't feel weaker for seeing him. She felt human. Revenge had given her justice, but it had also forced her to confront the truth she'd been avoiding. Love and anger could coexist without canceling each other out. And forgiveness, she realized, wasn't something owed. It was something chosen. Alexander walked through the city that night, rain soaking his clothes, guilt heavier than any loss of wealth. For the first time, he wasn't running from consequences. He was carrying them. He found work quietly, consulting for non-profits, offering expertise without control or recognition. He learned what it meant to listen instead of command. Each step forward felt fragile, necessary. Weeks later, Maya received a letter. Not an email. Not a message sent through lawyers. A handwritten apology. No defenses. No promises. Just accountability. She folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a symbol of reconciliation, but as proof of growth. The cost of revenge, she understood now, wasn't pain or regret. It was choice. She had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over illusion, self-respect over conditional love. Whether Alexander would remain part of her future no longer mattered. What mattered was that for the first time in her life, Maya Collins stood entirely on her own, unafraid of power, unbound by contracts, and finally free to decide what forgiveness, love, and healing would look like on her own terms. The contract that had bound them, body, name, and fate, was officially terminated. The papers sat in Maya's apartment, signed, witnessed, and final. Legal closure had arrived, but the emotional closure remained stubbornly absent. She ran her fingers over the thick sheet, feeling the weight of every line, every clause that had dictated her life for 2 years. For months, she had fought to reclaim her autonomy, her dignity, her very identity. Now the contract was gone. But Alexander, he lingered in ways no document could erase. Maya had rebuilt her life quietly but deliberately. Her brother thrived in his new school, his laughter filling the small apartment with warmth she hadn't known in the cold corridors of the Blackwood mansion. She returned to her job, focusing on small victories, her confidence growing with every challenge she faced. Friends welcomed her back into the fold of their ordinary lives, where she could breathe without fear of scrutiny, without cameras and polished smiles dictating her every move. Yet some nights the memories clawed at her. The gala, the stolen kisses, the rare moments of genuine tenderness Alexander had shown. Love, she realized, did not simply disappear because trust had been broken. She could destroy the contract. She could destroy his power. But she could not destroy her heart's memory of him. Alexander, too, was walking a precarious path. His empire lay in ruins, and the lavish mansion that had once seemed like an extension of himself felt like a prison of regret. The man who had once measured life in acquisitions and strategies now measured it in lessons learned too late. He had lost money, influence, and status, but more painfully he had lost Maya, the woman who had shown him the stark difference between love and control, the woman who had made him want to be better, even while he was unworthy. He appeared at her door months after the contract ended, not as a billionaire, not as a manipulator, not as a husband in name only, but as a man stripped to honesty and humility. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, and his eyes bore the fatigue of someone who had finally faced the consequences of his actions. "I don't expect anything from you," he said quietly, voice steady yet weighted with vulnerability. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, or to fix what I broke. I just needed you to know that losing you was the hardest thing I've ever faced." Maya studied him, noting the absence of arrogance, the absence of pretense. He was unrecognizable from the man who had once orchestrated her life down to the smallest detail. She could feel the truth in his words, the raw, painful honesty that couldn't be signed away. They didn't embrace. They didn't kiss. There were no promises, no contracts, no formalities. Just two people who had loved, who had been betrayed, who had survived. "I've chosen my life," Maya said softly, "and I won't let anyone, not even you, dictate it again." "I understand," Alexander replied. "And I respect that. I only hope that someday we can meet as equals, without the shadows of the past clouding us." Maya nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over her. This time, love wasn't dictated by power or contracts or fear. It was a choice, fragile and beautiful, between two human beings who had been broken and were learning to stand again. As she watched him walk away, Maya realized the true freedom she had fought for. The contract had been destroyed, but so had the illusion that love must come with strings attached. Her heart, once captive to deceit, was free. She could rebuild. She could hope. She could live fully, without manipulation, without compromise. Alexander, too, would continue his journey, learning humility and the quiet power of accountability. Perhaps their paths would cross again. Perhaps they wouldn't. But neither would ever be the same person who had signed that first contract in a sleek office with a skyline as their witness. The contract was gone. Betrayal had burned. And yet, in its ashes, Maya found something stronger. The choice to live authentically, to love on her own terms, and to write the next chapter of her life entirely for herself. Some endings, she realized, weren't just closures. They were beginnings.